Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Mini Ninja speaking. Welcome to this episode of Retro Ninja Gaming, where, as you might be surprised, we're not actually playing Haggar the Final Encounter, but for this 100th episode of, or not 100th episode, 100th official video on my channel here, I decided to actually pay a small visit to an older title, which I had honestly not played in a good long time, but I was part of one of my favorite beat-em-up series, the Final Fight series. So right now we're looking at Final Fight 2 for the Super Nintendo / Super Famicom. This is actually the first of a multi-game little series here that's going to be going on, as I'm actually going to be playing the first 3 Final Fight titles, as well as potentially Mighty Final Fight for the NES, but playing as the one character that appear on all titles, the Mayor of Earth himself, the man with the giant mustache, Mayor Mike Haggar. As you can probably guess from the nature of this run, and the general series run as a whole, we're going to be playing as the only constant throughout the series, being Mike Haggar himself. As throughout the course of the games, he's the only one that's been present in all of them, with the various other co-stars, yes, co-stars even though in the first game technically everyone was equal, only appeared either in the 1 or 2 entries tops in case of Guy, or technically 3 if you count Final Fight Guy, and for the most part everyone else changed around, while Haggar effectively became the go-to star of the series. Also, for the sake of general balance, we're going to be running off the games on their default difficulty and live settings, and of course not adding any extra options such as the extra joy button, which is basically honestly a shortcut for the desperation attack, which in this case for Haggar is his double lariat. For anyone expecting to see either Maki or Carlos in this thing, you're not going to see them, and to be honest, if you really want to see a Carlos, I recommend looking at the Action Movie Show, which you can probably find in my playlist. Quite frankly, I know of enough Carloses as is. Anywho, the last thing I want to mention before the game gets really started in earnest, the reason for why Final Fight 2 is because I was actually looking at Final Fight 1, but I'm actually right now researching the key differences between the default Final Fight and Final Fight Guide to see what the big differences are. Let's begin. Capcom's offices in this area seem to be a little worse for wear here. Although it won't be long in this first stage, as we see a few of Haggar's staple attacks here right now, that we're going to actually run into the first of what I believe is a handful of cameos and just general nods to other games within the Capcom library. Also, another thing which is worth mentioning is, especially for those that played in the first game, Haggar is definitely much more maneuverable this time around, and because some of you, along with those extra little bootstraps and chin guards there, his pile driver is honestly a lot more workable this time around, and just generally everything moves a lot faster, at least it feels a point. Hey Chun-Li, how you doing? Unfortunately, that extra maneuverability came with a bit of a price because, especially compared to his original Final Fight self, Haggar in this game does do a significant amount of less damage, it feels like. Of course, honestly, that's basically just to help normalize the characters a bit more, because in the first game, to be entirely honest, if you got the right setup there, Haggar could do a ridiculous amount of damage compared to everyone else on the staff. Especially if you're playing the Final Fight Guy version of the game, it was effectively a no contest as to how much more damage Haggar did than his counterpart. Although it's a bit of a well-known fact, here's a little tidbit about several issues that came along the course of pretty much all of the Final Fight series as it was on the Super Nintendo / Super Famicom. Each of the games suffered from at least some form of censorship. In the first game, it was obviously the removal of the Poison and Roxy characters, which were switched out with kind of effeminate-looking men in tank tops with mohawks that I can't recall all the names, but Sid would probably be the primary one that would pop up during the title, which moved exactly like the original characters, but just it looked awkward to say the least. And in this game, while there's no return of Poison or Roxy, they did the exact same thing with another set of female characters in this game, which I'll just refer to as the Eliza set, since it's the main name I can think of off the top of my head, where they were changed with, as you can guess, just really effeminate-looking male counterparts, with names like Robert, and I think I saw Tyler in there somewhere later in this run, and generally, their attacks in the original version, or the Japanese ports of women, seemed a bit silly, but in this case it looks actually absolutely ridiculous. You'll see more what I mean when those enemies start showing up. Moving moving on to the story for this particular game, as the intro kind of demonstrated there, there's actually a bit of a resurgence in the Mad Gear gang, although honestly, as I can tell through playing this game a few times, although a bit rusty at this point, effectively almost no one from the original Mad Gear gang really does show up in here, although there will be some notable returns, especially around the last few stages, I'd have to say. And in this case, in retribution for what happened to the original gang and Belger, someone new who is mysterious and unknown at this point, and honestly I can't say really fits in with the rest of the cast, apparently revives the gang and then kidnaps the relative, the sister and, well, the sister Tamaki, who happens to be the fiancé for Guy, as well as her father. So of course, Maki's first instinct is to call up Ike Haggar, who's in America, in order to get some help. And he just happens to have a boarder by the name of Carlos, who happens to be kind of a notable fighter himself, it seems, to join him in the course of the action. Does this make sense at all? No. Is it a beat 'em up? Yes. So things don't have to make sense. For this sort of game, I guess people weren't really looking for the plot. I just want a flimsy excuse. Yeah, I'm gonna have this giant ex-wrestler that looks a little bit like Freddie Mercury in certain parts, roaming the world beating people up. That's what I really want to see. I'm not even kidding, look at this. This General Thug, which goes into what I refer to as the Atlas set, because that's the one that seems to really pop up a lot, is supposed to be just kind of a giant and burly thug that's meant to be kind of bigger than just about everyone else. But hell, just walking beside him, you can see Haggar is easily at least a good head taller than him. It doesn't really work for intimidation. In fact, aside from actual bosses themselves, and, okay, well, I might as well say it because we're going to be seeing him in the next little bit. If not in this stage, and definitely in the next. The return of the Andorra family, otherwise known as, for those that are more familiar with the Street Fighter setup, which is this is the family which Hugo belongs to. Make her lead a reappearance. That's the only other enemy other than bosses that's actually taller than Haggar is. And not nearly as burly. And actually, I have to say, the Andorra family is a lot easier this time around than they were in the original Final Fight. Which is honestly really nice because in the first one, they're kind of silly. Speaking of silly things, you're gonna see me do this a few times during the run, but at least something which I believe to be the case here. If you actually knock enemies off screen and you can actually keep them off screen in a way they can't attack you, as long as you make sure they don't physically appear in any form on screen by just constantly punching them off the side. I'm guessing the way the engine is built here, you actually have to be physically on the screen in at least some format. Oh, just to cut aside. There's the effeminate enemy I was talking about. Leon, in this case. Anyways, I think the way the engine works, you have to have at least some part of the graphic for the enemy or yourself physically on screen for any attacks to actually count. If an enemy is completely off screen, even if they're trying to attack you, which I don't think they actually are, which might explain why it's so easy, their attacks will completely whiff or not register, while since you're on the screen just fine, anything you're doing to punch off screen will still register with them just fine. This will come up later as kind of a way, if you can keep them off the wall or keep them off screen, they'll let you just wail on enemies in a slightly safer fashion. If this were the original game, that would have hurt so much more. Trust me, ladies and gentlemen. Anywho, we now meet the first boss, which only trigger once you directly step in front of his area where he's standing. 1-1 is... well, 1-1. As the first level boss, he's honestly not difficult at all. And he's basically just kind of a giant muscular guy that has odd face paint. Kind of reminds me of the Road Warriors a bit now that I think about it. The face paint bit there. Maybe some of that belongs in the Fist of the North Star, perhaps? Just a ridiculous look there. But yeah, he basically just jumps around. If you're close enough to him, he'll attempt to punch you in a very slow fashion, which honestly, even if he hits you once or twice, he's actually so slow you can counter-punch him after, especially with faster characters. And you can grab him very easily from a diagonal. And when he's not trying to do that really lame punch, he'll try to jump around and kick you. It's suffice to say 1-1 is not really a threat. He's a warm-up boss. The only reason I'm getting in here is I'm trying to get close enough for a grab to do more damage. Oh, my mistake. That wasn't a kick. That was more of a butt stomp than anything. 1-1 is useless. Why did they bring him on the gang? I don't even know. Thank you and goodbye. That's stage 1 in a nutshell. Or round 1, my mistake. And Haggar just jumps over all the boxes because that's what Haggars do, I guess. End story. The final fight for lives of Jinryusei and Reina is about to begin. Okay, nice play. Include the title of the game back in there. Round 2 brings us over to France as we begin the first bit of our European tour of beating the crap out of people. If anyone happens to know what the French version of "the giant wrestler broke my skull" is, please leave that in the comments. I'd like to know. Well, Haggar continues to punch down the French branch of the Mad Gear gang here. Here's a few things just worth noting about the Super Nintendo / Super Famicom ports of this general series. Although I really should say ports loosely because the only real port was the first game. Final Fight 2 as well as Final Fight 3 / Final Fight Tough, if you want to go by the Super Famicom name, were actually made directly for the Super Nintendo, and as far as I know, there's no actual properly licensed version of any of the other games for any other systems. I say properly licensed because I personally know for a fact that there actually was a Chinese bootleg port of Final Fight 3 that was made for the Nintendo Entertainment System, would you believe? Which itself was kind of built over a previous hack of Ryu Densetsu, aka Final Fight Fatal Fury Special, also done for Nintendo, in this case the Famicom system. Which the reason I mentioned that one is because I was actually originally going to do that as an episode for this Retro Ninja Gaming series, and it actually technically was episode 0 as part of a kind of offline video test, or just kind of a series 10 pilot episode kind of deal. Another thing worth mentioning is for these general games, the reason you see there's a limitation on the amount of enemies that are on screen is because aside from your playable character, realistically, or playable characters as they would be potentially having a second player, there seems to be a limit of 3 other characters, or really a realistic total of 5, give or take, that can be on the screen at once. You'll never see more than 3 enemies on the screen at a time. Probably just fit within the hardware capabilities of the system. Also, I missed the introduction there, but there was your first Andori of the game, which was dismissed in a very easy fashion. When I said it was easier than the first game, I really meant it. Here's a little tidbit regarding Haggar here. In this case, unfortunately, we don't have any of the other characters on screen to display it, but as you can probably notice, Haggar doesn't actually move his upper body at all from any of his walking animations. It's just the same general thing as his original standing frame. I'm guessing part of the reason why is actually a little bit of carryover from what they did for the original arcade title that just kind of stuck, because honestly it stays that way throughout basically all of his other representations in other games, and even later things such as his inclusion in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 / Ultimate Marvel, where he's also got pretty much a really stiff upper body. I can't say I know entirely for sure, but I'd have to say with fair certainty, I'm pretty sure part of the reason for that is because in the original game, his upper body was just really stiff because of how large he was compared to everyone else. They did it actually as a way to conserve some memory and space just by having less things to animate. At least that would be my first guess at it. And they probably liked it so much they just kind of let it carry over. Unfortunately, in this game in particular, or actually the first 2 games, I think they might have updated the thing a bit for the 3rd game where he got some animation back. Animation period, I should say. But it makes his lower body look a little disjointed compared to his upper torso, because it looks like it's really loosely connected or just doesn't seem to move right. Just kind of a technical oversight, but realistically, unless you're specifically looking for it, which in case I was, because I do some animation work on the side, as you might have noticed from previous pixel art videos. Honestly, a lot of people probably wouldn't have picked up for it, or really cared, to be honest. Getting back to the main action for a minute, I think we're about to be introduced to one of the more annoying enemies of the game. Not so much because of the character or the enemy's general difficulty, but just because of the annoying. Yeah, there he is. Please welcome to the crowd, Elec, which, as you can guess, is the fat electrician-looking guy with the tuning forks there, which on his own is fairly easy to get rid of. Honestly, most of the time it doesn't have a lot of health on him. But assuming he manages to have enough time in order to charge those tuning forks, if he hits you with any of his attacks while it's charged, it does a lot more damage. And much like the original Wong Wu characters, or enemies from the first game, which I'm honestly 90% sure he's based off of, he can do just a kind of a single attack up front, as well as a running attack that, although it's not great on homing, will attempt to hone in on you if you're at a distance. It won't run just straight forward. He's not too dangerous on his own, like I mentioned, but if you happen to be surrounded by enemies and that one of them happens to be in a lick that gets enough time to charge up, he actually becomes one of the higher priority enemies, because if he manages to hit you, his one hit will do more than just about anyone else short of like an android or a boss character. The worst part, if you happen to be hit by another enemy and then it hits you, you basically get comboed into it, and that can do a ridiculous amount of damage. Unfortunately, I accidentally picked up the 2x4 here, which, while it does an okay amount of damage for a single hit, does much less than I could if I had just Haggar on his own. So yeah, let's take the intentional hit to get rid of it. Because honestly, Haggar without weapons tends to be much more versatile. Unless it's something like a knife which you get rid right away because you throw it, you generally don't want to have weapons in your hands. For the most part, I have to say, in terms of the enemies that come up, since we've seen the majority of the different types that have come up at this point that will show up throughout the course of this game, your priority enemies tend to be the ones that do a lot of damage, like the Andori family as a whole. Elix when they show up, just because if they get the chance to charge up the electricity on their tuning forks, if they manage to hit you, and they tend to have very generous hitboxes, it feels like, it does a lot of damage for one hit. If you're playing as Haggar just because of how slow you generally move, any of the replacement Eliza enemies, or if you're playing the original Famicom ports, the Eliza enemies themselves, actually tend to be really annoying because their jumps are actually fairly quick. They move fairly fast, which makes them a little harder to hit in this case. And they have really generous hitboxes on their jumping attacks themselves. You basically have to really know when it's coming in order to step out of the way, or to do a jump kick in order to knock them out of the air. And if you have multiple at a time and you're spread out, this will get really annoying. You'll get, unfortunately, quite a few cheap hits that way. Other than that, though, everyone else, short of a boss, is honestly fairly easy to deal with. Okay, actually, one exception out of that. Assuming they can grab you, then yes, the Atlas style of enemies will do quite a bit of damage too, because the grabs are actually pretty generous in how much they hurt you. Anyway, getting back to the main stage itself, we're now introduced to the second boss of the game, Freddy here. From what I recall on the flavor text for this character, he was pretty much kicked out of the Air Force for punching out a superior officer, and from there, Mad Gear kind of recruited him, and he's now kind of running the supply shipment for whatever they have here. It's an unnamed series of drugs, as far as I personally know. But basically, he's running part of the transporting thing over in France here. Any resemblance to certain Russian wrestlers is entirely coincidental, although not really. And there's a flat top in the back that looks a bit like a certain other military executive or a military soldier that's from another series as well, same one as the Russian wrestler I just mentioned. And as for Freddy's attacks as a whole, Mostly it's just kind of a series of punches, which even if he hits you, can counter punch. A lame looking body splash for a running dash attack that he has there, as well as, I believe, a jump kick. It's an improvement over Wan, but honestly, he's not that hard. It only gets a bit more troublesome if you happen to still have other enemies on the screen at the time. Even though, unfortunately, between that, he left me in a bit of a bad spot. It's once you get him on his own, I was in no real danger here. And that's round 2 at its conclusion. And because this is the Final Fight series, we hate cars and we need to beat them up. It's kind of odd that this thing really carried on throughout as many series as it did. Of course, you had this in the original Final Fight game, as well as this one. I can't recall off the top of my head right now to remember. This also appeared in some format in the third Final Fight title. Well, of course, you had cars getting pretty much wrecked in the Street Fighter series as well, throughout basically all the iterations of Street Fighter 2 and making a reappearance for Street Fighter 4, which only makes sense really because the Final Fight and Street Fighter series are connected in some way. As you can guess, especially from the last or the newest update for Street Fighter 4 that's coming out, Ultra Street Fighter 4, including even more Final Fight characters that were in there before, which themselves made quite a few appearances in the Alpha series. So generally, you have an entire universe out there that really hates cars for some reason. Go figure. For this particular stage, we have a new stage obstacle that's in the way, being a bunch of landmines. The good part, anyone can set off landmines. Realistically, you know you have a bunch of landmines on the ground. You actually want to maneuver yourself in such a way that you have the enemies walk in the landmines for you, which will do, I'd say, roughly a combo worth of damage on them just for one hit, the one bad step, and that way they take the damage, which makes your job a bit easier, and of course you avoid stepping on yourself, meaning that you don't get damage from it. I have no idea what happened there with the jump there. That was supposed to be a spinning pile driver, but sometimes the button press doesn't seem to come out. I don't know why. This next little bit here gives you 6 landmines to work with, and yeah, they'll basically take out themselves with the landmines. It's actually a bit amusing. I forgot that the Eliza-style enemies also have a really kick that goes in there. I know they realistically wanted to do the censoring because obviously they didn't want to have the idea of beating up on women in the North America titles, but it's just the way that they edit that in there, it looks so silly. That's probably what offends me the most about that. Looking at the life count, I didn't even realize how much it had gone up by. In this game, I think it's every 200,000 points you get an extra life, which is one of the things, or one of the many reasons why this game is honestly fairly easier than the original game it came from. Final Fight 1 was much more difficult by comparison. Hell, if that was the original Final Fight 1 version of Endori, he wouldn't have delayed nearly as much on that jump there at the end, and honestly would have pegged me and probably killed me there on the spot. Let's see if there's anything. I'd like to think there's a health pickup very short. Oh, not that it's gonna do any good, I'm dead. Yeah. Well, the idea there was hopefully to get to the next room, and every little bit they'd like to have a possible health pickup, which unfortunately, if it's there, will come a little too late. What's in the box? Figures. That's exactly what I needed. Oh well. At least I can hopefully time it in such a way that I can pick that thing up before I go into the next room, because this is one of the auto-scroll sections. You beat up everyone in the room, and the computer will take over and scroll you to the next bit. It will honestly be one of the... I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. just generally the auto scroll or the compared to anything that's a transition, doesn't always look like the most graceful thing in this game. I don't know why. Just it seems a bit computerized. Even the angle there. In theory, they can make the angle work, or the angle to get to the starting point in this section a lot smoother. But you can literally see Haggar go a little bit left, a little down, a little left, a little down, and a little down until he gets to his final spot, the marker spot for the stage. Actually, wait, hold that thought. I just remembered just worth mentioning about the movements in this game. The reason you haven't seen me do a diagonal at this point, I just remembered, is no, you can't actually walk in a diagonal. I'm thinking of a different series here. Alright. Unfortunately, well, I would explain the kind of awkward move there. It still looks a little... Wait, did I just walk on an angle just then? I think I did. Maybe it's the original can't walk on an angle properly? Crap, big weapon, that's gonna be useless. Well, I don't want to take any damage just yet, so let's see if I can get to the end of this section and then this book. Well, that works too. Yeah, either way, I can't remember if you can walk on a diagonal right now off the top of my head, which is funny because playing this game, you'd think I would remember. But, yeah, unfortunately, the transition scenes tend to be a little on the other side. I understand there might have been some limitations there, but to be honest, it's a kind of a what can you do situation there. On the bright side, it's still a better transition point than what they had for the original Final Fight game ports, which a lot of the kind of transition scenes that were present in the arcade title were removed entirely, actually. So, especially on things like third round, where part of it you actually grabbed by one of the Andori family and brought into kind of a caged arena where you'd be fighting both Father Andori and Grandfather Andori at the same time. He's actually completely missing, and the screen would actually black out before the main door that you break down to get to that segment, and you just magically appear, or the scene would continue inside the cage match, and of course when you finish that, then you magically appear again outside. Looking at the stage further, between this and the later stages, it makes sense why Mad Gear would have a presence, because like an airport, okay, that's used to transport contraband. The first stage is pretty much kind of a dock setup, so yes, that's another good reason. That's another form of transportation for whatever their product is. And in the later stage, they have basically what's a traveling circus, for lack of a better term, that has their own set of train shipping containers, which of course, once again, that's cover for contraband of some sort. But what the hell are they doing in this area? That's incredibly decrepit. I can't seem to think of anything of value in this area that they would have to have any of their assets for. Doesn't make a lot of sense. And here's another equally good question. How can they afford so many extendable batons for all these generic foes here that just have an awkward look setup, kind of an awkward look to them, the Elias type, and yet they can't afford a proper shirt for him or the Atlas style enemies. I'm guessing they just keep it so he's bare chested and just to leave his tattoos more, his scars more visible, just for intimidation, I guess. Now we're in kind of a below the waterway there, near what I suppose is supposed to be kind of a sewer setup here. Even more emphasizing what is of value in this area. They have all these Mad Gear guys hanging around there, and obviously someone to guard the area as a kind of a final boss of sorts. What is of value here? I can't get it. This section is here. This is almost like just prior to the boss of the area. Here's another little fun fact about the port for the first Final Fight game. well, the multiple ports in this case for the Super Famicom and Super Nintendo. Ouch. All those ports, they actually all had a certain set of issues that were related to both of them. Namely, the first one, and the key one, as we see the boss just enter the room, they couldn't actually fit all the characters at the time. As you probably know from playing the arcade version, there were 3 main characters. But in both Final Fight and Final Fight Guy, you could only play as 2 of the 3 characters at any given time, and it was really a one-player affair, so there was no co-op either. In the original port, you had Haggar and Cody as the playable characters, with Guy apparently still being in Japan. In Final Fight Guy, which in the North American regions, to my understanding, you can only play if you got as a rental through Blockbuster Video. That's a theme that seems to come up with some stuff I talk about on here. It has Cody, who is still training in Japan at that point, so it's up to Guy to save the day, as according to that intro. Also worth noting on that particular bit, both games, or both of those original ports, are missing stages. Or at least one notable stage that has a fairly notable boss in the series in it. Since they happen to kind of miss that, they actually kind of make reference to it in later ports of the original game, such as Final Fight 1 for the Game Boy Advance, where they actually include all the stages along with additional dialogue before boss fights that were tossed in there, and certain bonus characters in the form of what they call Alpha Cody and Alpha Guy, which are effectively shrunk down versions of the respective characters from the Street Fighter Alpha games, with their own little storylines where Guy seems to recall that he's in the events of the past by the end of the first stage, and Cody himself comes to realize that too, and actually comments about how he doesn't remember the industrial area, which Rolando was part of, because he skipped over it to go by the beach or something along those lines, referencing exactly what happened in the Super Nintendo / Super Famicom version where they skip over it. That would prove funny, as for a guy who got snubbed in 2 of the initial larger ports of the game that were more available, Rolando from there sure as hell made up a lot of appearances everywhere else. He included become a mainstay by the second Alpha game, or Super Alpha game, and making appearances in later titles as well. Such as obviously Street Fighter Cross Tekken, and now his latest inclusion into Ultra Street Fighter 4. Upon what I would say popular demand, but more realistically, people demanding that those characters be moved to a game they actually want to play. Because Street Fighter Cross Tekken kind of bombed. Badly. Very, very badly. It's honestly unfortunate, because if they had managed to get some fixes with the systems up there, it was actually a pretty good game. Or at least it had the potential to be a really good game, but just a lot of the kind of strange system stuff that they were doing at the time just really screwed the pooch on it. Oh, well, what can you do now? It's a little too late for changes. Getting back to the game itself now, we're now in England at this point, which basically means we had to cross the pond to get here, and this would be the aforementioned circus stage, or circus train I was mentioning, which makes a hell of a lot more sense, as the train itself can be used to bring contraband around. Of course, we're not going to spend the entire time on the track. This first part of the stage is just about done, which means we're going to do another little traditional thing in beat 'em up style games, which means we're going to be fighting on top of a train any moment now. I don't know why that's such a popular thing to do, but it sure as hell seems to pop up in a number of games. With, off the top of my head, the most immediate one I can think of is Return of Double Dragon / Super Double Dragon if you play the Super Nintendo port for that, for the North American regions. I think this Andor is the last enemy before we do the first official stage transition. basically Andorra can't. If you get them on their own, Andorras can't handle angles very well. And generally they're a cakewalk, to be honest. If this were the original game, he would have at least been able to try and grab me at least once. Awkward transitional walk. We have the background element that is the train beginning to move now. Note that I don't believe you'll see the actual train wheels moving on there. And you can have Haggar and the rest of the cast just casually jump onto the train. Like, nothing going wrong there at all. It's probably good for this case that they have all the enemies transition from off the screen, because otherwise you'd have to be asking yourself, how are they getting on the top of the trains to begin with? There doesn't seem to be any kind of ladders or anything to indicate there. And I'm guessing they didn't want to spend the time to draw enemies properly climbing up off the sides. Although, now that I think about it, probably the scaling has something to do with that, because I can think of a few games where you have enemies literally climbing off the sides of obstacles to get at you. Like Battletoads and Double Dragon, for example, which appeared on a few systems, where not only could they climb up and climb around the sides, you could also jump down or climb along those sides too. And basically get one shot at it. You get hit there, but you can do the same to the enemies too, so hey, it was fair. As fair as that game could get. As for this part of the stage, I didn't test it at this point to figure out because I didn't want to spend the life doing so. But I think you can accidentally scroll off the bottom of the stage if you go all the way down, and you'd actually fall down to your death right now. You need to do so. I can't recall if that's the case in this game, but if it's not this, then it would definitely have been Return to Double Dragon, where they did something like that. Which, the first time you do it, it definitely catches you off guard because you think they would have purposely put in an invisible wall of some sort to prevent that sort of thing. This may not end too well because I've got basically no health in. You're not exactly going to find barrels or anything. Yeah, that's gone. Yeah, you wouldn't exactly find barrels or anything hanging around the top of a train for any reason. And turkeys wouldn't make much sense either. Basically, this section of the stage, which leads into the boss area itself, you basically have to be able to one-shot it and just keep on going, not expecting any kind of a health pickup at any point, because just due to the location, there's nothing to give you, nothing that would make sense anyway. Return of that kind of enemy type. Joe is actually kind of a retooled version of one of the original enemy types from the first game that actually had just really weak enemies that would run on the screen, throw a Molotov cocktail, and then run back off. And of course, in this case, or actually no, it's the same in the original one, even if you managed to kill them, they still had a possibility, in this case a 100% possibility, of tossing the cocktail anyway, and anything that got caught in the flame would be damaged. And the boss of the stage is an evil clown, which is something else very similar to what they did in Return to Double Dragon, which I can't remember if that came before or after. Either way, what is with beat-em-ups and evil clowns? I feel this is a reoccurring theme that should not have been allowed to happen. Come on now. You get the whole idea, yes, we like the idea of clowns being evil for some reason, but why? At least this clown makes a lot more sense than the one that's in Return of the Dragon. Apparently you have the giant fat clown that somehow can manage to spin and do basically Blanca's rolling ball at you in a perfectly straight line. Guess that makes perfect sense. Anywho, that's it for what's going to be the first part of this game. This video actually ran longer than I expected, so I'll be seeing you in part 2 of Final Fight 2.